Hi, if you are developing any credit risk model for corporate entities or corporate industries, whether small scale, large scale, or global large scale, then this session is for you. Today, I will be covering IFRS 16, which was implemented in 2019 and must be followed in all credit related modeling for corporate industries. Thanks for joining. This course is tailored for you. Now, let me share my screen and show you that IFRS 16. IFRS 16 is International Financial Reporting Standard 16. So it tells about the operating leases. Now, there are two types of leases, operating lease and finance lease. In both the cases, two parties are involved. One is the lessee and one is the lessor. Now, in operating lease, or as a whole, when lease comes into the picture, like when we do not own any assets, okay, rather purchasing the asset fully by cash, if we do not have the ownership of any asset, rather we have the right to use that asset, then this IFRS 16 or operating lease comes into the picture. Okay, now operating lease is basically, if I need to give you an example, like Amazon, Target, Reliance, and Walmart utilizes rented warehouse to store their materials and final products. These companies lease storage facilities where they keep their inventory before distributing it to various locations. The rental expenses for these warehouses are a significant part of their operational cost, as these spaces are essential for managing their supply and chain and ensuring timely delivery of products to the customer. Okay. Whereas the finance lease is basically, if I need to give you an example, is a construction firm or construction company, they require a costly crane. Instead of buying, they opt for a financial lease. The leasing company owns the crane and the firm pays regular amount comprising interest and principal. At the term's end, the firm can purchase the crane at a reduced cost. So now, one more difference between operating lease and finance lease is operating lease will always be for the shorter period of time, whereas capital lease or finance lease for the long period of time. Okay. In operating lease, ownership of the asset cannot be transferred from lessor to the lessee, whereas in finance lease, the ownership of the asset will be transferred after the lease period. Okay. So before IFRS 16, how, or before IFRS 16 implemented by International Financial Reporting Standard or IASB board, financial, all the entities which were preparing their annual report or the financial statement, they used to keep this operating lease as part of off-balance sheet item. Now, what is off-balance sheet? What is on-balance sheet? Off-balance sheets are basically which is not impacting the total asset calculation. Okay, like we are keeping all those assets, if so, as a footnote after the balance sheet. Example like contingent liability, like any liability or a potential loss that may occur in the future depending on the outcome of a specific event. Potential lawsuits, product warranties, a claim or dispute brought to a law court for adjudication. Okay. Then the purchase commitment, if I'm going to purchase the raw material for the next 5 years, that type of contractual obligations, any capex or capital expenditure, like I'm going to buy the fixed asset, it can be property, plant and equipment, furniture or machinery for the next 5 years, that type of contractual obligations which has no impact to the face of the balance sheet or the total asset calculation or total liability calculation, that would be used as a footnote. And on balance sheet, on the other hand, is like the combination of your current asset, current liability, non-current asset, non-current liability, and equity. Okay, so if you're going to calculate the total assets, total liability, then those items will come. Off balance sheet item will not be considered. Okay, all the ratios like solvency ratios, debt service coverage ratio, if we need to calculate, then we have to rely on, or we have to consider the on balance sheet figures. Clear? Now, why IFRS 16 came into the picture? There are several reasons to implement this IFRS 16. And note that IFRS 16, these rules is only implemented in non-USA countries. So broadly, it is used in UK, continental Europe market, European Union, and other region. But in US, they strictly follow US GAAP accounting standard, which is generally accepted accounting principle. Sorry. Now, why IFRS 16 has came into the picture? Just to show the better picture of a company in terms of how they are controlling their assets and liabilities, better risk assessment, better manage of profit or loss account, better manage the total debt, the leverage, and the solvency. Okay. Now, in my next slide, I'll show you that how this how this IFRS 16 has entirely changed the financial statement or the annual report prepared by the company. So in the second slide in table number 1, we can see that off balance sheet item in the first column, pre-IFRS 16 and post-IFRS 16. Prior to this implementation, IFRS 16 was considered, as I have already mentioned, that as part of off-balance sheet item, which has no contribution, no impact to the total asset or total liability. But after that, this entire amount has been segregated into assets as well as liability. Suppose the off-balance sheet item was 100, then 50 will go to asset and 50 will go to liability. Now, the balance sheet will be reconciled. Okay. Now the assets which we are mentioning here, it is denoted as or known as right of use asset. Okay. I am holding the right of the assets. So that's why I have to show in my books. Now the liabilities which we are showing under the liability side, it's an obligations because I have borrowed money. Okay. To get the right of that asset. If a company borrowed money, which is natural, okay, and holds the right of any asset and use that asset for their business. So now these assets and liability, these two will be that the entire off balance sheet item will be segregated into. Okay. And if we are holding the right of the assets, these assets are also the right of use assets are also operating asset. We are utilizing that asset. The example which I have given, that Amazon, Target, Reliance, they're using that warehouse. Okay, so that warehouse will become their right of use asset. And in order to hold the right, they have borrowed money from the bank or any financial institution, and for which they are liable to pay the interest as well as the principal amount. So that's why this liability will be known as, or the lease liability will be considered as loan or lease liability or debt. Clear so far? Great. Previously, there was no concept called right of use asset and the lease liability. Now in table 2, if we are showing some assets and the liabilities in the balance sheet, simultaneously we have to also book its related cost or expenses incurred during the year. Now the assets which we are using, the right of use asset which we are using for the purpose of our production or for the purpose of storing our material and the final products, there must be some reduction of the value of that asset, right? Or wear and tear. Now, this is known as the depreciation. Depreciation is the reduction of the value of the assets. Year on year, the value will be reduced for any assets which we hold. That's why the depreciation comes into the picture, and the liability, the loan which we have borrowed from the bank to get the right of that right of use assets, we have to also pay interest, right? So depreciation and interest will come into the picture. Now, prior to IFRS 16, there was only concept of rental expenses. The example we can recall: Amazon, Target, Reliance, Walmart, they have rented warehouses. So for which they were obliged to pay monthly rent. Okay. So the entire of balance sheet operating lease liability generated or incurred rental expenses, which we directly update in the profit or loss account to calculate our operating profit. Now, after IFRS 16, this rental expenses has been divided into two parts: depreciation and interest. Now, suppose rental expenses we used to update as 100. Now, after this implementation, 50 will be updated as depreciation and 50 will be updated as interest expenses. Now, if we divide this 100 into two parts, then ultimately we are showing only 50 when we are calculating the operating profit, because operating profit calculation do not consider interest expenses cost. So that's why it will only consider 50 as a depreciation. It means that my operating profit or company's operating profit will be increased, which is a good sign. Correct? Because operating profit plays a major role. It has a significant impact to all the risk variables or the risk factors. If we calculate EBIT, EBITDA, everything is based on the operating profit. Okay, any leverage ratio, if we calculate, then the formula is net debt by EBITDA. I will take a second session and I will show you all that after the implementation of IFRS 16, what are the important ratios that got impacted, whether it get increased or decreased. If increased, what is the impact? If decreased, what is the impact? So I have one slide where I have analyzed the impact analysis post implementation of IFRS 16. I will conduct that in my next session. Hope you enjoyed this IFRS 16. So if I want to sum up, is that after the implementation of IFRS 16, 4 adjustments we have to make. One is a company's books, they will include right of use asset. It means the total fixed asset will be increased. Similarly, a corresponding amount of lease liability or loan will be added to the liability side, which means that total debt will be increased. Now, just make the point or the connection. Since we are using right of use asset as part of fixed asset or tangible fixed asset, which we can touch for the purpose of their operation, we are utilizing that asset. It means that we have to also show depreciation expenses. So that depreciation we will be showing in the profit or loss account, and the lease liability which we are considering as loan, for which we have to pay the interest expenses. That will also be shown in the profit or loss account. Okay, I believe you all have enjoyed my session. I appreciate comments. If there is any disconnect, please ping me, please comment. I will probably answer all of your queries, and please give me feedback, because first time I am in the YouTube channel and I need everyone's support. Thanks everyone for your precious time.